Welcome to Very Honored Frater BT's Esoterinerd podcast, episode 83. What would Yeshe do? Part 1, in which we ask ourselves, what would Yeshe do? Now, just to be clear for people who are paying extra close attention, the image associated with this episode is an image of Yeshe Dawa, but we're primarily going to be talking about Yeshe Tsogyal. So this is part 1. Part 2 will come out sometime in the next few days. Longtime listeners, of course, know Kess Frey from episode 2 and several other subsequent episodes. I believe this is his fourth interview on his fourth episode on the Esoterinerd podcast. He was a friend of my father's. He is a student of Tibetan Buddhism and centering prayer, an author of several books. But before we get to that interview, I thought it might be appropriate to get back to our recurring segment, in which I recite the poetry of Very Honored Frater P. In other words, I read the Book of Tokens by Paul Foster Case. The Meditation on Dalet. I am the door, the passage from the world of ideas into the world of form. Expressing myself, I take form in substance. But the power which worketh in that substance is the sovereign force of mine outflowing ideas. Consider well, O Israel, the knowledge of me which thou hast in the sacred letters. For with them, even as it is written, hath the universe been created. In Aleph, I present myself as the source of life eternal, self-dedicated to bearing the heavy burden of creation. In Bet, thou seest me as the primal will, which, fixing beforehand the boundaries of the universe, maketh mine own being the dwelling place of all creatures. As it is written, Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hadst formed the earth and the world. In Gimel appeareth my perfect wisdom, which uniteth all seeming contraries, and establisheth throughout creation the balance of warring forces. Now in Dalet, I present myself as the portal through which life, eternal and unbounded, entereth the realm of temporal and limited creation. The great door is Binah, and Binah is Ima, the fruitful mother of all living. She is the desirable one, the precious thing, more to be sought after than rubies and fine gold. She is both father and mother, for her fruitfulness cometh from the yod of the supernal wisdom. She is the thought which spinneth the plan of existence, that web of manifestation, which entangleth the minds of fools, and giveth understanding to the wise, who know the secret of its mystery. In her is concealed the plenitude of tetragrammaton, and hidden in that door of perplexity is the Son, who is from all and among all. This is the gateway of life and form, yet through it come also death and conflict, even as it is shown in the numbering of Dalet. For Dalet Lamed Tav, being 434, is also 11, and 11 is the half or division of 22, which representeth the whole circle of creation. Therefore is the door a cause of separation, and the setting of one part against another. And for this it is written, that the Lord is a man of war. For in this saying is Dalet Lamed Tav concealed. I am the knowledge of the wise, and in me the ignorance of the foolish hath its root. From me come forth all conditions, the evil as well as the good. Without the setting of metes and bounds, there is no bringing forth, and thus there can be no creation without seeming evil. Creation hath its origin in life unlimited, yet for the sake of manifestation doth that life descend into the appearance of time and place. And that which hath neither end nor beginning appeareth to be born, and to be brought at last to death. Deluded by this appearance are those ignorant ones, in whom the light of my wisdom hath not yet dawned. From their delusion springeth a false desire, and from that false desire is generated unrighteous action. Yet nothing is performed save by my power, and I am the real actor in these deluded ones, as truly as any sage. From the fires of pain and suffering, kindled by their ignorance, in my good time shall they come forth, cleansed from the dross of illusion, resplendent images of my golden self. My creative power is the projection of myself, and produceth the semblance of another. But know, O Israel, that besides me there is none other. I only am the knower and the actor, the one I am, whether alone and unmanifest, or appearing in the multiplicity of created things. The primal force of mine ideas dwelleth continually in Absolute. Thence it floweth forth into the three lower worlds, through the door of understanding. As it is written, by understanding hath he established the heavens. I am the fruitful womb, whence all creatures have their birth. I am the mother of mothers, hence it is commanded, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. For I, who am thy father, am thy mother also. And if thou honorest me, the giver of life, then shalt thou triumph at the last, even over death. Let's get to that interview, shall we?
Yeshe Tsogyal means wisdom moon.
Oh.
And the tradition of Tara comes from that. And according to mythology or the story, and this was probably something that didn't happen on this planet, but the great Bodhisattva Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara, who has a universal consciousness and who took the Bodhisattva vow not to enter final enlightenment until all of their sentient beings were liberated, he was overlooking the creation and saw this numberless sentient beings trapped in Maya, or samsara, illusion, suffering and suffering and suffering. And he's motivated by this great love, so he was he was crying profuse tears, and he said to himself, how am I ever going to liberate all of these sentient beings? Because it just seemed impossible, because there were so many of them, billions and billions throughout the universe.
Yeah.
And out of one of his tears was born Tara, the female bodhisattva, and she said, I will help you.
Nice.
And she took embodiment as a human being on some planet, and she was in a female body, and she was being told as she became a spiritual aspirant and was meditating and doing the things needed to move her consciousness towards liberation and enlightenment, she was told by people there who knew about these things that you should incarnate in a male body because male bodies are superior.
And she said no.
And she took a vow to attain enlightenment in a female body. And so that's what she did, and her name was Yeshe Tsogyal, which means wisdom moon.
Padmasambhava and the king of Tibet at that time, I forget his name.
Tristan Detsen.
Thank you. Where they were bringing in not just Buddhism from India, but Taoism and Chinese medicine from China.
They have
and
a
bringing
Bon Po system too, that Bon Po system in Tibet.
The older system,
that was
right?
The indigenous.
Yeah, a lot of those deities came from that.
Yeah.
They didn't originate with Buddhism.
Yeah.
They were sort of grafted on to Buddhism. So
that was the indigenous religion, was Bon Po.
There's in this one book, Lotus Born, there's Padmasambhava, as he's entering into Tibet, he keeps running into the Bun gods, and they're stopping him, saying, we don't want your Buddha Dharma here. And then he'd throw a dorja and blind one of them, and and so then they'd be have a new name, like the one-eyed defender of the Dharma.
He converted them into Dharma protectors.
Sometimes violently. Yeah.
But some of them have rebelled against that.
Yeah.
That's kind of an aside to a discussion of Yeshe Tsogyal.
Exactly. But that was more the specific wanting to bring about more awareness, and then we could talk generally about wisdom and how Sophia is a woman's name in Greek and it means wisdom, and Yeshe is a woman's name in Tibetan and it means wisdom, and hey, isn't that interesting? And but then go specifically into Yeshe Tsogyal. But I think that mentioning what was her last name when Tara took her vow?
The name was Yeshe Dawa. Dawa is Tibetan for moon, so that means wisdom moon.
Very cool.
Full moon, of course.
Wow.
And that's the white Tara.
Yeah. Okay.
Tara has many different manifestations. Because of being supremely enlightened, both Avalokiteshvara and Tara have a universal consciousness. And because of having a universal consciousness, they have the ability of manifesting innumerable individual expressions. So they could manifest at the same time in different bodies in many different places.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the idea of omnipresence, the divine being everywhere.
Yeah.
Omnipresent. And relating it to the tree of life, I would say that they are beings that have evolved into the supernal triad on the great tree, on the macrocosmic tree.
Yeah.
So they would have the consciousness of Bina, understanding, and Hokma, wisdom, and Kether, the crown. So they're capable of manifesting an unlimited number of individual consciousnesses at the same time in the creation. Yeshe Tsogyal is considered a manifestation of Tara.
Okay. That makes sense.
An emanation of Tara. Emanation is the
look
term
similar.
that they use.
It makes sense. The artistic depictions of White Tara and Yeshe tend to look similar in a lot of cases.
Yes, in a lot of cases. Yeshe is also considered a manifestation of the Hindu goddess Saraswati, who is the goddess of learning. And she was known to have an incredible memory. Incredible memory.
Yeah.
She was the one who wrote down the different teachings that Padmasambhava gave.
That makes me
She
think
recorded them, and some of these teachings, many of them actually, were hidden. Some hidden physically, and some also hidden astrally or in the mind. They're called terma treasures. You've probably heard that expression before.
Not yet.
Well, the termas were hidden because they were designed to be discovered in future centuries to help sentient beings through the dark age that we are supposedly in now. And people who discover the terma in Tibetan are called tertans. And there's been many famous tertans. So they discover a particular terma, and that contains a teaching, often practices, that then could be given to help people. So Padmasambhava was very prophetic. In fact, he is quoted in the 8th century as having said, "When the iron bird flies and horses run on wheels, the people of Tibet will be scattered all over the earth, and the Dharma will come to the land of the red man." Now, that was an incredible prophecy. He's talking about the iron bird being the airplane, horses running on wheels or automobiles. Yeah. And the land of the red man, of course, is what we call America, what we call America now. So he had a lot of foresight, and he used that same
politically correct.
He used that same
First Nations
foresight.
Padmasambhava.
He used that same foresight when he gave these terma teachings that Yeshe Tsogyal recorded, and the two of them together hid them. Sometimes they were hidden under rocks, sometimes under streams, by waterfalls, many different places physically, but also they're hidden in the mind. So some of the tertans would discover them through the practice of meditation. I had the opportunity up in Anchorage to go to a teaching that was given by this teacher, Nam Kadrimand, and it was the Yeshe Tsogyal empowerment when he was there. And I was very impressed with him. Actually, I had a dream some years before he came there about him, and I didn't know it until I actually saw him in person. But one of the disciples of another Tibetan teacher named Chagdul Tuku, which presented a red Tara practice. One of his followers, who he had trained to become a lama, a woman, was giving a red Tara practice. And I went to part of that, and it was at this particular location called the Denali Towers in Anchorage. And I had a dream that I was at that same place, and this Lama was coming to give a teaching, and I saw this gold aura around him before he started giving the teaching. And I was kind of recognizing, in the dream, I was recognizing that he was a highly evolved being. And in the dream, he didn't seem to, he knew that I was recognizing him, and he didn't seem to like that I was recognizing him. And then the dream ended.
Interesting.
And then, maybe 5 years later, I went to this Yeshe Tsogyal empowerment, because I knew the local Sangha up there, and they said they had this special guest coming, who's also part of the Nyingma lineage, and he was going to do a Yeshe Tsogyal empowerment. Because I was already very interested in Yeshe Tsogyal, I was very keen to go to this. And when I was in the same room, and when he first came in, I saw that same golden aura around him before he started giving the teaching.
Wow.
So that kind of connected it for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it it was an incredible teaching, and after it was over, it's customary to give the Lama a gift. So I had a $20 bill inside a white envelope, and I went up to him and I handed it to him, and I bowed down, and he put his two hands on the two sides of my head like this, and he was just sort of giggling, and like this energy came into my head, and I was like high for the next 2 days.
Wow.
He gave me a blessing. And I went home and I just went into meditation, because this was really taking me someplace,
cool.
But prior to that, let me tell you how I first became interested in Yeshe Tsogyal.
Okay.
I mean, from my early days in the 1960s, when I was interested in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and this was early days when I had done some experimenting with the psychedelics. In 1965, 1966, my uncle, who was a psychotherapist, after my first trip, I went to visit him because I didn't know anybody I could talk to explain what had happened on that trip.
Right.
I could tell you for 2 hours about that trip, believe me. If you want to do a separate interview sometime about that, I'd be happy to do it.
I think you told me a bit about it in one or two.
Yeah, I think I have.
Yeah.
Well, I went to see him.
That's in your book.
And told him my experience. It's not in my book.
Not in a published book, but in the book.
Yeah, it's in a private book that I've written, yes. And he told me that there was a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead that had been designed by some psychologists at Harvard for guiding people through psychedelic sessions. It's called the Psychedelic Experience. It was by Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass later on, and Ralph Metzner. And so I was very keen to get a hold of this book, and I went to Vroman's in Pasadena, which was one of the best stores I knew of at that time, to ask for it, and they were selling it under the counter. They didn't have it out in public, but it was out of stock, and so they said they would privately order it for me, and they'd come back in a couple weeks. But they did have a copy of the original Tibetan Book of the Dead by Evans Vance, on which this thing was based. So I bought a copy of that, and that became my interest in Tibetan Buddhism. There was a foreword by Carl Jung in the book, and also by Lama Anagarika Govinda, who became one of my teachers. And I think there was one by Sir John Woodruff also, who was one of the early pioneers. He was an Englishman, but he lived in India, and he got involved in the Kundalini yoga practices over there. And I found out about Padmasambhava because Evans Vance had like a series of 4 books on Tibetan Buddhism. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was the first one. There was one on the life of Milarepa, who was the great yogi of Tibet. And then there was one dealing with Padmasambhava and the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation. And there was another one on certain teachings and doctrines of the gurus of Tibet. So I became interested in Padmasambhava then, in the mid-1960s. And then a little bit later on, I was living in San Francisco. This was in the 1970s, and a Dharma center was founded in Berkeley, California, by a teacher named Tarthong Tuku, who was a Nyingma master that he had escaped from Tibet, and he came to the United States, and he started this center there. And he started publishing Tibetan texts, and they were translating them from Tibetan into English. One of them was called The Life and Liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal. And I pre-ordered that book because I knew that she was Padmasambhava's chief disciple and consort. Another one they did that came out before that was called The Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava. It's a 2-volume set. And this was like in the 1970s, and it was a very finely produced book. It was like $50 for the 2 volumes. And the one on Yeshe Tsogyal was fairly pricey too. I got the one on Padmasambhava, but they never sent me the one on Yeshe. And several things happened in my life. And eventually I was living at an ashram in the Rocky Mountains above Boulder for a couple of years. And I was practicing some Tibetan Buddhism, a puja ritual that I learned from Lama Govinda, from a teacher, a follower of his, in San Francisco. And then I lived in Boulder a couple of years, and then I moved up to Anchorage. And I still hadn't received this book on Yeshe Tsogyal. So I wrote to the Dharma Publishing, and I told them, that I had pre-ordered this maybe 8 years ago, and I was sure the thing must have come out by now. So they sent me a paperback edition of The Life and Liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal. Now, the press is called Dharma Publishing. I would highly recommend that you get a copy of that and you read it.
Okay.
It's a text from the Tibetan that was translated into English, and it's written kind of in a verse form.
Okay.
But it goes through the details of her life and all the different things that happened to her. She was born of a very well-to-do Tibetan family, and the king wanted to marry her. She was going to marry the king, and then Padmasambhava, he showed up in Tibet, and the king became one of his disciples, and she became one of his disciples, and she didn't want to be the queen. She wanted to go full-time into practicing the Dharma because she was a manifestation of Tara.
Wow.
And her heart was burning for enlightenment.
Wow.
So she was kind of an uncontrolled, young woman, and she was exceedingly beautiful. She had many suitors. Many men wanted her as their wife. She spent several years with Padmasambhava, and he initiated her into all the esoteric Vajrayana practices. She practiced for many years by herself in caves, went through many different experiences,
Good to see you.
and she attained full Buddhahood, full enlightenment. And in a woman's body, of course. And then, she started teaching and traveling. And some of the things that happened, that there were some people who had a child that had died, and she resurrected the child from death. She performed some of the same types of miracles that are attributed to Jesus, and they're recorded in this book. And there was an incident that happened to her when she was meditating by herself in a cave. It's very famous. There were these 6 bandits. Tibet has had bandits, outlaws, violent outlaws. And they found this beautiful yogini meditating in the cave, and they proceeded to rape her, in turn. But when they did that, when they had intercourse with her, because of the energy exchange with an enlightened being that they experienced, they all became her disciples. And she guided them. She didn't punish them. She was so compassionate. She saw how they were. She converted them to the Dharma, and they became disciples of hers.
I wonder if you could help me with something, because I told that story to someone.
You've heard it, yes.
And I told that story to someone who had been raped. And she told me that hearing the story triggered her. And the idea of a religion where there's some prominent goddess figure who forgives men for raping her sounds to her like it was invented by chauvinistic, patriarchal, asshole men, rapists, who are trying to ease the conscience of their fellow male rapists. Can you help me with that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that you could certainly interpret it that way. coming from the assumption that men are chauvinistic,
Right.
self-centered, egotistical, and trying
typical. Sounds like an organized religion.
that they're trying to justify immoral behavior.
Right.
But Yeshe Tsogyal was not a normal human being.
Right.
She was a Buddha.
Right.
So her perspective was nothing that we could even comprehend as human beings.
Yeah.
This is not intended in any way to justify the sexual abuse of another human being,
Yeah.
particularly against their will.
Yeah.
But she was coming from this transcendent position of enlightened compassion,
Yeah.
and they had to face up to their negativity.
Right.
They had to go through the process of facing their karma.
Yeah.
And when they became her disciples, they were begging her to help them, because the energy exchange that they had with her forced them to see what they really were.
Yeah.
And so it was not a pleasurable experience for them.
Right.
It was a hellish experience because they saw the monsters that they were. She revealed that to them,
Yeah.
and she revealed her compassion to them. But that's not something a normal woman being raped would be
Right.
capable of doing.
And nor should. I mean, there's the name of the podcast, What Would Yeshe Do? It's, of course, based on the idea, what would Jesus do? And Jesus was also, according to the story, an enlightened being. And he would turn the other cheek and allow himself to be crucified for wrongful charges just to make a point.
Out of compassion,
but
it's a sacrificial love.
So when they say, to a Christian, be like Christ, what would Jesus do? If I'm saying, what would Yeshe do? What am I saying?
It's not to pretend that you're enlightened.
A Buddha when you're not.
Yeah, as a Buddha when
Yeah.
we're not.
If you
but
wanna,
it's kind of a moral compass for existential choices.
Right.
What would the light in me have me do?
Yeah.
As opposed to my lower self.
Yeah.
Or my flawed human personality, my self-centered ego.
Yeah.
What is the higher path here to take?
Yeah.
Yeshe is an embodiment of that. And we can receive guidance from that if we attune ourselves to it. But that's not to presume that we are equal
Right.
to it in any way.
Yeah.
Because we are still limited souls, limited human beings, aspiring to grow spiritually.
Yeah.
But it would be self-delusional to entertain the idea that we have attained perfect enlightenment.
Yeah.
An example of that I've found very helpful on the Tree of Life is in the idea that each of the 10 spheres, the holy Sephirot, has a small tree of life within it. And in each stage of the spiritual journey, starting with the bottom, with Malkuth, or what's called the Zealotry level, the first level, the soul has to climb that little tree of life
Yeah.
to move through the lessons of Malkuth. And so when you get to the supernal triad, you could delude yourself and think you've completed
Arrived
the
at
journey.
the actual supernal triad when you're still in Malkuth.
Yeah, you're in the highest stage of Malkuth. The soul has to climb that tree 10 times
Right.
to get to the top. A fully enlightened Buddha has done so,
Yeah.
but we haven't.
Yeah.
And I think that's the downfall of many teachers they're still in the personality astral triad. They've climbed the tree in Yesod, foundation, or in Hod, splendor, or in Nitzuk, victory, and they think they've totally arrived.
Right.
And they become self-delusional, and they appoint themselves as enlightened teachers, not realizing that they're still in the bottom triad. They've got a long ways to go. In fact, I would say, as long as you are an individual consciousness, you've got a long ways to go, because the supernal triad you become a universal consciousness when you move from chesed, mercy, across the divide, going through the invisible sphere, which I like to call Doth the cloud. The cloud being a reference to non-conceptual contemplative meditation or prayer. And then into the supernal triad in Bina, the Divine Mother, which is the mother of all souls, that sends us down the tree into incarnation in Malkuth. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's very humbling. We realize that even though we've achieved a certain measure of partial enlightenment, we still have a hell of a long ways to go.
Yeah.
But the temptation is to develop spiritual pride and egotism and to delude ourselves into thinking because we've reached the top of the supernal triad in one of the lower spheres, in Malkuth or in the personality also triad, that we're finished.
Yeah.
And we're not. Yeah. That's the downfall of many spiritual teachers. And if you don't have that perspective that the Tree of Life gives us, there isn't anything really to tell you otherwise. Unless you're accountable to someone that's more highly evolved that can tell you, no, you're not there yet.
So in the sense of what would Yeshe do, I was just thinking when you were talking that most people might look more toward the beginning of her career rather than the end. So the beginning of her career, she chose wisdom and knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge and working with a good teacher, rather than the riches and fame of being Queen of Tibet. Right. And that was a big choice she made. That makes me think of the story of how Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama's father, was told, your son is either going to be this great king or this great spiritual leader. And he said, well, make sure it's the great king, and he did everything he could to give him all the wealth, and ended up creating the situation where Buddha, ended up waking up one day and realizing that it was all a sham.
Yeah, he was either going to be a Chakravartin, which means a world ruler, or he would become a Buddha. And his father tried to shelter him within the walls of a palace from all suffering. And then one day,
even the knowledge of his mother died.
One day he was taken out. He wanted to see what was beyond the walls. I'm sure this is all very metaphorical, but he saw the four passing sights. He saw someone that was old and feeble. He saw someone that was sick. He saw people that were suffering in pain and misery, and he saw a funeral. And he asked the chariot driver, what are all these things? And then he realized that human life is impermanent. And so no matter what you've got as a human being, you're going to lose it eventually.
Yeah.
And then he made the vow to find a solution to that suffering.
And yes, she knew that inherently when she made that choice.
Yeah, she turned down material wealth and fame and power.
Yeah.
To pursue the spiritual journey.
So rather than someone saying, what would Yeshe do, and then looking to Yeshe the enlightened later on in life, maybe it would be more like looking at the beginning.
The whole journey.
And for the beginning, just avoid bandits in caves, Jesus. Like carry a sword, or something, as far as that particular story, because that's a very sensitive story that, I've talked to
I was shocked when I read it.
Yeah.
But it's in there, and it's showing her compassion, but also,
culturally doesn't necessarily jive real well with our assumptions now,
Yeah, well, this was feudal Tibet, and somewhere in the 8th century or 9th century or something.
Yeah. So we're not saying what would Jesus would get himself crucified. We're not saying get yourself crucified. What would Yeshe do? We're not saying get yourself in that situation either.
Oh no, it's not a path of masochism.
Right.
But that's just an example of the magnanimity of her perspective. She was so detached from what we are still attached to.
It's very much a similar story of being crucified. He was raped, as much as a man can be by being crucified and being hung there to dry,
And before that, he was scourged, he was beaten, he was spat upon.
He had compassion for the ones who did it to him.
Forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they are doing.
Right. So WWYD might actually be very similar to WWJD, even though it sounds like it's making fun of it, or it's saying, oh yeah, well not that, let's do this instead. But really, it's the same thing, except instead of a man, it's a woman, and instead of Judaism, it's Buddhism and Hinduism,
and you need to to read the story of that particular incident
Right.
in the overall context of her whole life.
Right.
Not just look at it as an isolated incident.
Yeah.
Because you don't see the bigger picture
Yeah.
of what she was doing and why she was doing it.
Yeah.
And if you isolate that incident and then you bring it into our consciousness in the 21st century, it seems nuts.
Yeah,
Why would she allow that?
Right.
But she was not a normal human being at that point.
Yeah.
She had practiced all these different sadhanas.
Yeah.
There's some incredible quotes from her in this biography of her. She supposedly lived for 200 years. Something though that Namkadrima said, because he was asked about that, was that they may have been counting like each of our years as 2 years. But Padmasambhava, he went off into the sunset, and she stuck around for a long time,
Yeah.
converting people. And they didn't want her to go. And that's all recorded in this book. And she gives like her parting teachings and things. It's really beautiful. One of the lines that I was really struck, that she was telling people, she said, "Draw humility and reverence from your very bones."
Wow.
Powerful line.
Yeah.
But she really emphasizes the importance of doing the practice. The term in Sanskrit for meditation is, what is it? Dhyana. Dhyana. And the translation into English means doing the wisdom. So dhyana is the Sanskrit word for what Yeshe is the Tibetan word for.
Oh.
Doing the wisdom, that means practicing the meditation. There's no substitute for that. There is no substitute for that.
That came into Japanese as the word Zen.
You have to do the practice.
Yeah.
And that will take you through your mind, through whatever your particular karma is, through the dark side of your personality and the light side. As you were talking earlier about that metaphor of the churning of the
Yeah, it sounds like. Oh, right. Yeah.
That's more from what we call the Hindu tradition, but really Buddhism was a reformation of Hinduism, the same way that Christianity was a reformation of Judaism.
Right.
So they're intimately connected. And the Buddha, Sakyamuni, he lived in the cultural context of what we would call the Hindu world. That's not what they call themselves.
Right.
That's the name the Westerners
The British called them that.
gave them. But that was the context that he was in. And of course, the pattern of rebirth, the cycle of taking many incarnations, was an essential part of that tradition.
Yeah.
Just as it was in the time of Jesus in the Near East. People remembered their past lives. It wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
So the other thing I could tell you, besides get this book and read it. And there's another one that's a companion to the Lotus Born book. It's called The Lady of the Lotus Born.
Oh, cool.
Published by Shambhala, who published The Lotus Born, which is a very good and readable biography of Padmasambhava.
Yeah, I love that book.
Get The Lady of the Lotus Born. That's the life of Yeshe Tsogyal.
Okay.
It's a companion volume to the one you've already read on Padmasambhava. For me, I was living alone in Anchorage, and a relationship I'd been involved in. I went up there to be with a woman, see. And I was involved in this relationship with her. We'd lived together, for a couple of years, and then she felt she needed to move on. Basically because I was getting more and more into the meditation, and she wasn't.
Yeah.
Being too spiritual, for some women.
Right.
And so, anyway, I was very, heartbroken when the thing ended, because she had given me indications in Boulder when I first knew her that she would be interested in this. But that's another, story, as they all are. So I was going through a healing process when I read, and they sent me, The Life and Liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal. So I was alone, and I was vulnerable, and I was reading this book, and it really spoke to me deeply. And one of the things that basically that Yeshe Tsogyal says in the book is that if you practice the Vajra Guru mantra, we, meaning her and Padmasambhava, will come to you spiritually and guide you if you practice it with a sincere heart. So, and the mantra is given in the book, I Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hum is the mantra, and you kind of do like a circle, on your different chakras. Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hum. You get the picture. I'm showing you visuals, so it's not
Om, third eye.
No, Om, crown chakra. In Tibetan Buddhism, the third eye and the crown chakra are combined into one.
Okay.
And then Ah is the throat chakra. Hum is the heart chakra. Vajra is the chakra of, I guess, the solar plexus. Guru, sacral chakra. And then Padma is coming back up to the heart. Siddhi is the throat. Hum. Om Ahum Vajra Padma Siddhi Hum. So I started doing that mantra a lot, believing this, and continued, reading the book. And let's see, that was, what year was that? That was maybe 1986, 85, 86, 87, and I continued doing that. Then some years later, I'm skipping some stuff, of course, but some years later, I had gotten involved with centering prayer, and I was at this monastery in the Rocky Mountains near Aspen, Colorado, called St. Benedict's Monastery, near Snowmass. It's right next to where John Denver had his property, where they were doing a lot of things related to ecology and the environment and solar energy and stuff like that. And I'd been going there annually to do a private retreat for a few years. And I was in my room. This was like the 5th year I'd gone there, doing my meditation. And also there was a Zen master and his wife that were there, that were friends with Thomas Keating. His name was Bernie Glassman. He studied under the Roshi that was here in L.A., the Mount Baldy Zen Center. Yeah, he had been made a teacher by
I heard
him.
he was a bit naughty.
Which one?
Oh, the Roshi of the Zen monastery in Mount Baldy. There was one that was very charismatic and getting into trouble for sleeping with people, and then they got rid of him, they kicked him out, and then the one that replaced him had no personality, and then people stopped showing up. So it's kind of like, it seems like that's the case sometimes.
Well,
is you have a...
I don't know which one.
Might be a different one. Maybe
I don't know which
place.
one Bernie Glassman was the disciple of, but he had received Kensho, or some level of enlightenment, and was teaching on his own. But he and his wife were there. I'm telling you that because it's going to come into my story. So I'm meditating by myself, in my room. I participated like in their morning lauds, and they would have mass, very sacred ceremony, different than what you get in the normal Catholic Church. And then they would have vespers in the evening. And it was a walk, maybe of a half a mile, to get to where the actual monastery was. But I'm meditating. I'm in a deep meditation, and all of a sudden I had a vision. And in the vision, there is a female Buddha figure, and she has like attendants with her, and she's looking at me and she's smiling. She has this beautiful, peaceful countenance, and as I look at her, I start experiencing the memories of the life of Yeshe Tsogyal, of her life. I experienced being high up in a mountain somewhere, and at first I thought it was the Andes in South America, but I started experiencing the memories of the life of Yeshe Tsogyal, and she was just smiling at me and beaming. And I felt a very good energy peaceful energy come into me. And then, the vision went away. And I was amazed because here I'm in a Christian monastery, and I'm doing centering prayer, I'm doing Christian practice, but I still have the Tibetan part of me. I'm still doing some of that too. And I wasn't sure, who was this? What was this? That was my question in my mind. And I walked to the monastery for Vespers that evening. And Bernie Glassman and his wife, and they're dressed in their Zen priestly, robes. They're in there. And as I walk in there, in my mind, I'm reciting the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra. And I walk in there, I'm reciting this mantra, and he looks over at me and he stares at me, and it's like telepathically, it's like, what are you doing? And he realizes I'm doing a Buddhist mantra, telepathically. He picked up on what I was doing. And then he goes like this, he makes the namaste gesture to me, and I'm feeling his vibes. And so after the Vespers is over and everybody's walking back, and he and his wife were staying, I think, in the barn rooms, because they were farther down the road than I was. I usually had stayed there. We struck up a conversation. And he says, well, what's up with you, And I said, well, I made the Bodhisattva commitment years ago. And that's why I'm doing this mantra. But I was drawn for my service into centering prayer because there's a big need within Christianity for spirituality, and I believe that centering prayer is an answer to that.
Yeah.
And so, we hit it off really well. His wife was really friendly, and during some of the services, like during the Mass, they have this thing where, they say, peace be with you, and show a peace to everyone, and he would do the namaste, and I would just feel his vibes. I was very impressed with him. He started a bakery in New York City and taught homeless people, gave them jobs and stuff as part of his compassionate thing.
Yeah.
He did a lot of contribution. He's very active. So I wasn't really sure about this vision. I mean, it was real. I was sure it happened, and it was a blessing, but I wasn't sure what to identify with who it was. So after my time there in Colorado, I came out here to Los Angeles to visit, and my parents were still alive at the time. And I went up to Lake Arrowhead and visited an old friend of mine, a woman that I'd been really involved with, actually I'd been legally married to, but we remained friends.
That's good.
You know how that could be. I think it's a wonderful thing when
that happens.
You separate from someone you've been intimately involved with, but you can still forgive each other, whatever you need to forgive, and remain as friends to some degree, and still love each other, but as friends, in a more of a platonic sense. So this woman had a friend who was a very gifted psychic and spiritual reader that lived in Lake Arrowhead. She had worked with the Course in Miracles and had actually received an anointing from Jesus to do a particular ministry. And her ministry involves escorting people, souls that get stuck after they die and are not able to make the transition to cross over. She escorts souls over as part of her gift. Another part of her gift was to read people's past lives and tell them information about that. And to read you or me, to read a person and talk about your current relationships. As a matter of fact, after your dad passed, I went and saw her. And she got in touch with your dad's
Was her
spirit.
name Erica?
No, her name was Delane Floor.
Oh, okay.
Her name was Delane. She is no longer on the earth plane. She was an older woman. And she contacted your dad's spirit when I asked about this vision I'd had. I also asked her about, some of my past lives.
Yeah.
She gave me insight into what my identity was in my most recent past life. Very interesting, because she had information that she had no physical way of knowing, that I had learned through research and had experienced through dreams and other things about this past identity. But anyway, I asked her, what was the identity of this being that I saw?
Mm-hmm.
And she was all gold, when I saw her. And she said, well, this is a guide that you now have, and she's been with you for about 10 years. And it was 10 years since I'd read The Life and Liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal, the book.
Yeah.
She said, you're very lucky to have her. And she's known as the Mother of the Buddhists.
Wow.
Or the Mother of Buddha. And so I knew that's one of the names of the higher manifestation of Tara, as the Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom. That's the Sanskrit term for it, for what Yeshe Tsogyal wisdom moon is.
Wow.
She became known as Yeshe Tsogyal when she took human incarnation.
Yeah.
And then one of her incarnations on this planet
Was Yeshe Tsogyal.
was Yeshe Tsogyal. It was a primary incarnation. And I have had many experiences and guidances and helps from this being. But what she has done, what Yeshe does, or White Tara, she said that she has just assigned to you one of her emanations. It's not like you've got a monopoly on her.
Right.
She's guiding innumerable
It's like the Santa Claus at
beings.
the mall isn't the real Santa Claus.
There's no, yeah.
They're all the real Santa.
Well, yeah, there's no limit
Yeah.
to the number of manifestations that she can put out to guide individual souls. If you form the connection with her and you're sincere, she is available. The Yeshe Tsogyal sadhana that Nam Kadrimad gave is very involved. You would have to have the empowerment, which I did receive, but it would take you a long time to learn it and to practice it. Of course, there's all the cards. They won't even send you the cards unless you've received the empowerment.
Now,
So it's a
is that when they
restricted-
come around here, or
It's a restricted
is
practice.
that something I might be able to do when I'm in India or Nepal? Like find them and get that empowerment?
He has a monastery in Nepal.
Oh, good. What was his name?
His
again?
name is Nam Kadrimad Rinpoche.
Okay, cool. Now I can add that to my list of things to do.
He's
in
a
Nepal.
very highly evolved being, but the stuff that he's teaching, from what Diana's told me, I told Diane about him because I was so impressed with him, and she was more into the BOTA and that. But I just said I met this teacher, and I'm real impressed with him, and he's going to be in the LA area, and you might find it worthwhile to go to his teaching. He doesn't speak any English, so he has a translator. And his group is called Ripa Ladrang. So if you wanted to know about him, they have a website. You would contact Ripa, R-I-P-A, Ladrang, L-A-D-R-A-N-G, Ripa Ladrang.
Okay.
I don't think he's doing much traveling anymore. But I saw him here a couple of times. And, Diana's seen him. But they're focusing more on these protector deity practices that are very long-winded. And they're not focusing so much on the deity worship, which is more practical. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to build up a base to move some of those protector deities from Tibet to the West. Because they're trying to keep their own cultural thing alive. And they're trying to transplant it into Europe and America. Because, the Chinese and Tibet have pretty much wiped it out.
Yeah.
But it's not for me to judge, really. But I would think that they'd be better off if they focused on the Four Noble Truths, the foundational practices, and the basic emptiness meditation, which is the equivalent of what centering prayer is, or entering into the mystery of Doth, the cloud, which is the invisible sphere that's inconceivable, non-conceptual meditation. That's the tunnel through which you transition up the tree.
Yeah.
And that practice engages the higher self working in the unconscious to transform it. It takes a certain amount of faith, patience, and faithfulness to the practice and sincerity to do that, to sustain a daily practice of it.
Yeah.
Most people want something they can do, like in Christianity and elsewhere.
Right.
A lot of people think, well, you're not praying, you're not meditating unless you're doing something. But with this prayer, if you do it, it does you. It's a direct journey into opening yourself to the energies of the unconscious. But you have to be prepared for what those energies are.
Yeah.
And some of them are going to be the shadow, the dark side of the personality, the part of ourself that we've rejected and denied and we don't want to see. And so when it's experienced, sometimes people won't experience it as part of themselves. They will do a projection and they will think it's some outside demonic presence that is attacking them. And that's what one of the criticisms of centering prayer is, the claim that it's not safe. And I would say this: I've just finished a new book that's going to come out a little later this year, answering criticisms of the prayer. That if a person is in reasonably good mental health, if they sincerely desire a deeper, more intimate relationship with the Spirit, with God, with Christ, whatever you want to call Spirit, and if you feel attracted to praying in silence, then this prayer may be appropriate for you.
That makes sense.
But if you don't have all three of those criteria, it won't be.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to do it if you think you have to or should, if you think you're not going to live forever in the afterlife unless you do it. I mean, there's all kinds of wrong ways to have a daily practice.
Yes.
But it's a very delicate thread to find self-discipline for the sake of the practice in a pure kind of way. Yeah.
Well, a guide, an inner plane guide like Yeshe Tsogyal will help bring you through those parts of yourself that need to be healed and cleaned and purified. She knows what your needs are.
Yeah.
And if you work with her, she'll work with you. But the heart has to be sincere.
As soon as the name Yeshe was applied, everything changed. That was when my whole life started changing, and things getting churned up and upside down, left and right. Now I'm talking about going to India and being alone for a long period of time. That was all after we invoked her name, and after we dedicated the project to her.
Well, she, like I said, she meditated by herself in caves for years.
Yeah.
And perfected these different
She wants
practices.
to show me those places where the Beuls that Padmasambhava told her about, the power spots.
Yeah.
I remember my dad always looking for power spots in the Angeles forest. He thought they were here too, that surely if they were in Tibet, they must be here.
You can go on a pilgrimage to the places that she and Padmasambhava meditated in caves, because a lot of them are in Nepal. They're not just in Tibet.
Excellent.
They're going to be in those other Himalayan countries. They traveled around a lot. There was another consort that Padmasambhava had who was named Manjarava. And she was the daughter of the king over the kingdom of the lake that he manifested in when he was born in the Lotus.
Right, I remember that story.
Yeah. So, both she...
Was that when he was very young?
Yeah, he manifested there.
When she knew him.
According to the mythology of it, there was this there was this huge lotus blossom in this lake, and he went out there to find out what it was, and there was this boy in it that he grew up to be Padmasambhava. That's why they call him the lotus born. Supposedly, of course, the lotus is a symbol of the chakras. So he was born out of the lotus. So allegorically, you can interpret that as well as literally.
Right.
But he's born in our
into
consciousness,
the practice, like the lamas, in a way.
out of the flowering of the lotus, of the thousand-petaled lotus in particular, the crown chakra.
I remember he had 3,000 years of lifetimes in India that he remembered in full, vivid detail. And because he knew so much, people thought that he was possessed by demons, or he was a demon. And they'd say, "Who's your guru?" And he'd say, "I have no guru." And so he realized at a certain point he needed to go have gurus and to go get empowerments and to go get the teachings from various people, so that when people said, "Who are your teachers?" he could list some teachers, rather than saying, "Oh, I just have I was born with knowledge from my previous lives," because people don't like to hear that. So I think that for me, that speaks actually to my ego, because I have a little bit of that. My dad raised me thinking, you're not only with that sort of my generation, you're a super special snowflake, but you're extra special because you're the only one in your class that knows about Tibetan Buddhist, mantra and meditating and all, and tarot and all this other stuff. So I had this sort of ego coming into the esoteric world, and into Wicca and into Golden Dawn, where I was brand new, but I was walking in so what are you guys doing here? So I had to. So that spoke to me, hearing about the story of Padmasambhava, that he learned he had to humble himself and have teachers. And
well, the information that I received was that when he first came to this planet, it was in ancient Egypt, and he mastered the mysteries of ancient Egypt, the Western mystery tradition, and then he started taking birth in India.
Interesting.
And in the life of Padmasambhava, the phrase is that he was like a honeybee who went to all the flowers, which were all the centers of learning, wherever there was spiritual wisdom, and he was empowered with everything that the wisdom of India had to offer before he was invited to come to Tibet.
Yeah.
They were trying to establish Buddhism in Tibet, but the Bon Po religion, which was a shamanic religion, and it had both black magic and white magic in it, it was so powerful that the Buddhist teachers that were going there, like Santa Rakshita, who went earlier, they weren't equipped to do battle with the Bon Po magicians.
Right.
Whereas Padmasambhava is called the occult incarnation of the Buddha. He was the warrior.
Yeah.
So he was able to do battle with them and to subdue them and to actually convert the entities that they were feeding into protectors of the Dharma. So it's quite a story.
Yeah.
And Yeshe Tsogyal is an integral part of that.
Yeah.
But she was a Tibetan.
Yeah.
She was a royal Tibetan and born in an upper-class family. And she had the world at her feet, but once she met Guru Rinpoche, that was it. She refused to. She ran away, She was disobedient.
Yeah.
All she wanted was enlightenment.
Yeah.
And he recognized her caliber, and he became her guru. She became his chief disciple. And then she carried on his work after he left, and then eventually joined him in his Pure Land. There's this whole thing about the different Pure Lands of the Buddhists, like Amitabha has a Pure Land. It's a Pure Land of bliss. And if a person is a faithful follower of this path, even if they haven't attained liberation yet, they can take rebirth in the Pure Land. And in the Pure Land, it's not like this world. You're surrounded by higher evolved beings, and you can complete your teaching there.
Oh, wow.
Once you've met the karmic requirements to be born there. So it's kind of a grace that you receive. And then in that Pure Land, you can be guided to liberation. And then you can become a servant. Like they were saying at the service today, we become servants of the light to facilitate the spiritual growth of those who are still not awakened to the path.
Yeah. And then I made the joke that it sounded like Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah.
Well, you have the woman who represented spirit or God, speaking the words of Jesus, basically, and saying, "I will send you forth so that you will learn these lessons, and I will compassionately allow you to go for aeons and aeons and aeons." And so after the first aeons and aeons and aeons, which they shortened, thank God. Last year it was much longer. They went around in circles. And then they say, we're suffering, we're sick, we're miserable, we're trying to, like, and so she says, okay, well, this is all done out of love. Keep going around in circles for more aeons. They're saying, please take this cup of bitterness away from us. Please don't make us suffer. And she's like, well, you're suffering for your own good. Keep going. And so then they go around for another several aeons, and then she's like, okay, now how do you feel? And they're like, we want nothing but to do what you will. We want nothing but to be vessels for your light. And so I leaned over and said, sounds like Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, I heard
a little bit.
I heard that. And you, well, from the point of view of ego, you could really see it that way.
Yeah, or psychological analysis minus religious devotion. Yeah.
But basically what they're doing is no different than the Bodhisattva vow.
Right. Yeah.
It's the choice to remain within the realms of manifestation.
And I think Paul Case,
out of compassion rather than out of need. So it's not like you karmically have to keep reincarnating to learn the lessons. You've learned them, but now, out of compassion for your fellow beings, which you are part of, and they're part of you on the deeper level of the universal consciousness, you choose to remain behind in order to assist and facilitate their growth, but you're not doing it to gratify the self-centered desires of the ego for power and control, or affection, esteem, security,
escaping
survival,
from prison,
wealth, fame, and power.
Wanting to not suffer.
No, those there will be inevitably some suffering for anybody that takes human incarnation.
Yeah.
It just comes with the territory. Yeah. But once you reach a certain level of adepthood, you can help without taking human incarnation.
Right. I feel that Paul Foster Case, in a way, was intentionally bringing some of those ideas from the East into a Western context with some of these ideas and some of his poetry. And he practiced yoga and did a lot of study also. And so a lot of those guys were doing similar things, but he was doing it in a subtle and very divinely guided. Like I get the sense from Paul Case that he did deep meditation before he wrote a single word of those Book of Tokens. Where Crowley, on the other hand, would just write. He just like whatever comes to mind. So they ended up with different schools, but they were drawing from the same source.
Yeah, I love Paul Foster Case's poetry, which we heard in that service, the Easter service that we attended at the BOTA temple today.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Yeah,
if you just close your eyes and you go into meditation and you really listen deep to it, it reverberates inside of you on a deep level.
Yeah.
It speaks to you. And that's the same way the text of this book I'm recommending, The Life and Liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal, is. If you read it that way, slowly with a sincere heart, and realize that this is coming out of a different culture.
Yeah.
So you have to make some allowances, but if you can enter into the spirit of it, it will give you many blessings.
Yeah.
If you're sincere. This book is an example of what I would call a transmission text. And actually this is the way I want my own books to be read, as a transmission text. If you read it very slowly, sincerely, with an open heart, there's a spiritual transmission that you can receive from the text. If you're open to it and you have the receptive capacity is there, if you have a certain amount of humility, faith, and openness, and you do it slowly, the transmission will come through. And the transmission is coming telepathically from the inner planes. But the text is simply a physical instrument to help us tune in to receive that transmission. And you may receive it post-reading in your dreams and in your meditation. So you don't want to rush through the
Right.
thing.
You don't want to like look for it. Like, where is it? Where's
No,
the...
you don't want to do that. You don't want to analyze it intellectually too much. I mean, you want to get, of course, a grasp of what it's saying, but the deeper part of it will come non-verbally and telepathically as a transmission text. That's really what the scriptures of, the Bible is. Any sacred text should be read as a transmission text. But to be capable of reading it that way, you have to make reading it into a private meditation that you're doing with the text, not a scholastic exercise,
Right.
or an analytical exercise
Frowning with a pipe.
where you're comparing it or judging it.
Right.
Don't save the judging until after you've processed,
Yeah.
because we aren't in a position to judge a sacred text until we've experienced it.
Right.
And to experience it, we have to get the transmission, which comes from the inner planes telepathically, non-verbally, through our intuition. And reading the Life and Liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal is a way of tuning into that spiritual guide. She's real. She's a presence. And when you read the text, she knows you're reading it. And if you're open, I was just blessed to receive that. And it wasn't until 10 years later, after I'd read it, that she manifested. And then I didn't get the confirmation of it until I talked to Delane a month or so after I had the vision. And she was able to be in communication with her. And on subsequent readings, she would tell me, like, well, do you ever feel all these chills on your right arm? She said, she's right next to you. She's pouring love into you. One time I was meditating, and I was up there in Lake Arrowhead at this friend's house, and I just had this great experience of love come into me through the crown chakra, and it came down through the different chakras. It was just a beautiful experience. And I talked to Delane, and she said, she's like giving you like a hypodermic needle shot of love.
That reminds me of one of the descriptions in Lotus Born where they made this elixir of immortality or something, and when you drink it, there were a bunch of rice-sized glowing golden dorjes that flow through your whole body and all through your veins.
That's like a metaphor for this type of non-verbal, non-physical experience of the blessings and the grace. And what happens is that energy starts to bring about purification, healing, and transformation in the soul. So it's food for the soul. It's what it is. It's nourishment. And it's the same thing that's meant by initiation, or abhikshka, as they call it in the Eastern tradition, where there's a transmission from the consciousness of the guru to the disciple. Once the disciple has been prepared to receive it, it's a transmission of the guru's consciousness direct to the disciple. It's a telepathic thing, and the disciple experiences whatever the guru can give them, and that moves them to a higher level. That's what Lama Govinda experienced. He writes about that in his autobiography, The Way of the White Clouds. That's not an easy book to find, but it is available. It is out there nowadays.
Okay. Cool. I look forward to expanding my library on these.
I think it was because of me that your dad became interested in Tibetan Buddhism.
How cool!
Because I had learned the puja that Lama Govinda had designed. Your dad already possessed the dorjes and the statues that his dad had gotten when he was in China.
Oh, I didn't realize the dorjes came from his dad.
Oh, yeah.
That's good to know. It's a hardcore-looking dorje. I can't find another one that looks as cool. And he got the strings around it from the Karmapa. Cool.
Well, yeah. Before that, though, he knew I explained to him about the puja, and we agreed that what I was doing in Tibetan Buddhism was the Vajrayana practice was the equivalent of what he is doing in the Western esoteric tradition with the Tree of Life.
Well, by the time I knew him, he was totally into the Tibetan. He was all about the Tibetan.
Yeah, he involved
He taught me
in
the
that.
tarot and the Tree of Life too, but he was mostly focused on the Tibetan.
Well, the Chogyal Trungpa was one of my teachers, and there was Trungpa who invited the Karmapa to come over here
Right.
and do the black hat ceremony and do his empowerment.
And this was the
stuff.
16th Karmapa, the previous one.
Right, the 16th. And your dad went and saw that, and he got really excited about it.
How cool.
But I can't say 100% for sure, but I believe my involvement in it definitely influenced him with it.
Wow. Interesting. So you're like my grand teacher in
And his-
Tibetan Buddhism.
His friend Jack Davison also got real involved, and Jack Davison started studying under Tarthong Tulku, who did the translation and brought that text of the life and liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal. And also Tarthong Tulku started a community in Northern California where they have a Tibetan community living there. They preserve the practices. It's called Odeon. And I donated like $500 towards it when they announced it. I was living in San Francisco. At the time, that was a big donation for me. But I really wanted to see this tradition transplanted
Yeah.
from, upper India or Nepal or wherever he was over here. And he has got a complete Tibetan version of all the scriptures of that tradition.
How cool.
The Tanjur and the Kanjur, and then people are now have been in the process of translating it into English. The publisher is called Dharma Publishing,
Okay.
that did this book on the life and liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal.
Okay. I will definitely check that out.
They've got a whole line of books. And they're kind of independent from all the other Tibetan Buddhist groups.
Interesting. Nice.
And I don't know if Tarthong Tulku is still alive or not.
Yeah.
But he published a book of Lama Govinda and his wife, Lee Gotami. They did 2 pilgrimages into Tibet right after World War II in the 1940s, before the Chinese invaded. And they have a photographic record of these old temples they went to.
Wow.
It's called Tibet in Pictures. Dharma Publishing also publishes that.
I have a lot of pictures from my father's father, but I don't have like the context behind them. So I have pictures of old temples and pictures of the insides of temples and pictures of all these different places. And I have certain stories that kind of match up with some of the pictures, and then other stories that I don't know if they match up, like when he was bringing the petroleum-based lamp oil to replace the whale fat-based lamp oil in the monasteries, and then he ended up trading watches for some of the statues.
This is your
and things.
grandfather?
Yeah.
Wow.
So the 1,000-year-old statue of Vimalamidra that I have, according to the story, my grandpa traded a watch. They had never seen watches, and it was a gold watch. It was a nice watch, but like given the 1,000-year-old piece
Wow, I didn't know that
of
about your
Chinese
grandpa.
antiquity for a watch. It
Yeah.
sounds like he's a bit of a shyster, but then I used to be very ashamed that he was my grandfather, and my dad told me I was him reincarnated, which made me double ashamed. And but then when I started to think about the fact that he was a young guy thinking he was saving whales, the Cuyahoga River was on fire, of course, but at least they wouldn't be killing as many whales for the lamp oil in the monasteries. Like from a different point of view, like in 1919, that might not seem so sinister as being a Standard Oil executive. I mean, it was Saucony, so it's literally ExxonMobil. Like nowadays, it's the equivalent of Rex Tillerson. Rex Tillerson. I might cut this part out, but my grandmother's first husband was the Dan C. Reed. That instead of it being in Shanghai, he was in Moscow. So he was the one forging those connections between ExxonMobil and the Russian government.
Oh.
So when I saw Rex Tillerson come in, I felt a little bit of a tinge of pride, knowing that my family was involved.
I'd laid the foundation of that.
But not really.
I didn't know all that about your family.
Yeah, there's some fun stories.
Well,
he drove the first oil rig up the Yangtze River and got kidnapped and held for ransom. So all that smog in Beijing started with my father's father taking that first oil rig up the Yangtze River.
Well, the monks or whoever they were that traded these valuable statues
Yeah.
for the watch. They were happy with the watch.
Yeah, at the time.
So they didn't feel they were being ripped off.
Right.
They were getting...
I just wonder if my grandpa knew he was ripping them off. I think, I mean, anybody who, like, it seems like the whole currency exchange, was established by Dutch, people who would go to a place and say, really, that's all you want for this? Great. And then they'd go back home and sell it for an astronomical amount of money, using the fact that they risked life and limb and they built the boat or they bought the boat and they had to go get it and it's labor and time and all this other stuff. They marked it way up, and now we have part of the world where the currency is worth this much and the rest of the world where it's worth that much, because it was intentionally set up that way, because the people that had the upper hand wanted to keep the other hand, same as the horse owners when Rome was a village before there were any women. The ones with the horses felt they had a greater right to the wealth of this new village because they did more to help defend them against the neighbors who were trying to put them down, and so hence the class of knights that we know today, starting with the people who not only owned but knew how to take care of their horses in the ancient village Rome. It's really sad.
History is fascinating.
Yeah. How do we fix it? It's gotten really crazy with these billionaires just getting richer, and it's harder and harder for everyone else.
My personal belief is that it's only going to be through a consciousness awakening, a spiritual awakening, and that, as Desjardins said, there is this noosphere through which everyone with consciousness is connected.
Yeah.
And once a certain critical mass of people have evolved into a consciousness of love, and that love is pouring into the noosphere, it will create a force that will pull up the consciousness of everyone else who's willing into an awakening. And that would change things literally overnight. Because the experience people would have would be realizing that we're all part of the same spiritual body on the deeper level.
Yeah.
So when you meet another person, it's not like you're just meeting someone that's separate from you.
Right.
But you're meeting a part, you're meeting another part of your deeper spiritual self that's in a different physical body than you're in.
Yeah.
So whatever you do to anyone else, you are doing to yourself, and you will consciously feel and experience that.
Yeah.
So the idea of ripping someone off or causing them to suffer
Self-destruction.
would be intolerable, because you would experience the pain as soon as you did it.
Yeah.
But that's a long ways off, probably.
Yeah, I know. It feels like it's at least several thousand years away.
It's what's happening now, but we're not conscious of it.
Right.
Because we're locked into the separate self-consciousness
Yeah.
and locked out of the universal.
Yeah, there's been these attempts, like the Universal Church, the Catholic Church, get everybody to understand the same symbolism, get everybody to meet once a week and stay on board. They've tried it. They've tried different things, different models. Now it's like the corporate model, where if we get everybody with the same HR department and the same rules of hiring, then maybe everything will be fine. It's like that quest for the utopia that has to be artificially implemented through rules and through patterns and, rituals and things.
Well, all organizations now on Earth, whether they're religious, or secular, governmental, whatever they are, they're made up of imperfect human beings who have false selves and true selves. And as long as that's the case, there will be a dark side, a false self side to every institution, every business, every organization, every church,
relationship, individual, family,
every individual relationship, everything.
business.
We just have to accept that that is where we actually are.
Yeah.
And ideally, that's not where we want to be. But in order to get where we ideally want to be, we have to honestly see where we realistically are.
Yeah.
And accept the fact that we have that dark side, the shadow side, the part of us that is flawed.
Yeah.
And then, through spiritual practice, work on that and allow the divine force to transform it by us cooperating with the divine guidance. It's not something that we can do on our own as a separate self. It's it's like trying to pull yourself with your bootstraps.
Or some rational step-by-step, process or something.
And remember, we have to go through the small tree that's in every one of those sephira on the tree of life.
Yeah.
And it's only when we become a universal consciousness that we're there.
Yeah.
But I think once we get to the sphere of mercy, or chesed mercy, that's the sphere of the masters of compassion. That's the highest sphere we can evolve to as an individual consciousness. That's the sphere of the exempt adept. And if you know, I'm sure the exempt adept is called exempt because everything that adept does is motivated by divine love. So it's karma-free activity.
Merciful exempt adept.
Yeah. The greater adept is the one that is learning the lessons of righteousness and justice and enforcing that, because that sphere, that's the Mars sphere, that's the love and the zeal for righteousness.
Yeah.
And that's the enforcer of it. For those of us who are so dull spiritually that we do not respond to love and mercy, the only thing that we do respond to is pain and suffering. And at some point, the person's going to say, I'm tired of all this pain and suffering. So maybe I better reevaluate my modus operandi.
Beating my head against this wall over and over.
Because I keep coming up with pain and suffering.
Yeah.
But once our heart is converted to love, there's no need for that. There's no need for judgment. Then we attain the mercy of love, and there's no grudge held against us. Because we're not the being that created that karmic debt anymore.
Yeah.
We're transformed into a compassionate, loving soul. That's what we want to be.
Yeah.
But it will still be an individual consciousness. And all those souls, those masters of compassion, those are the spiritual guides. But they're at the level where they're an individual consciousness still.
Yeah.
But they are many of our teachers and initiators and helpers. At some point, that master of compassion will be prepared for the arduous journey across the abyss into the supernal triad to become a universal consciousness. And that's where the Yeshis are. Or that's where the Christ is, the Buddhists, the Bodhisattvas, the highest ones.
Yeah.
They are universal consciousness. We cannot even conceive of what that is. We can name it a universal consciousness, but it's beyond our ability to wrap our mind around, because our minds are individual consciousness. So our job is to work on our individual consciousness for now.
Yeah.
And now can be for a long time until we are exempt adepts.
Yeah.
Of course, there's the middle path, straight up the middle pillar. That's the person that seeks divine union and wants to just transcend the creation. And when they get together, they have that choice. You can enter into the limitless light, or you can remain and serve the divine plan.
I remember my mom explaining that my dad preferred Vajrayana Buddhism to the older form of Buddhism for the reason that the older form, the original form, what some people call the real form, and Vajrayana is not even Buddhism, acknowledging that point of view exists, that he didn't like that direct route, that he wanted something with teeth. That was what he liked about the tarot, is it had teeth, that it wasn't all just light. There was a death card and a tower card. And with Tantric Buddhism, there's a left-hand path that's always like you can accidentally go down, or you can go down on purpose, and blowing open these different channels, as opposed to kind of the post-Puritan, repressing them, like walking around like, I don't feel that way. No, I would never be, no, just go ahead and say, well, what if? and then then now I can let go of it. Like I don't have to walk around holding these restrictions to get
being repressed. So
repressing
your sexual energy,
right,
and your passions. That's a form of self-denial. So my opinion is that someone that opts for that is going to stay stuck in the personality astral triad. They're not going to get above that.
Yeah.
We have to accept all of the energies that are within us and integrate them.
Yeah.
But the path of the mystic is that path. The path of the occultist is the path that takes all of life and goes through the side pillars as well as the middle pillar.
Right.
And that's the path of service.
And the path of Yeshe, the path of wisdom, because you have to go down those roads to know what those roads are like.
You don't get the wisdom unless you pass through all of those different experiences.
Yeah.
Wisdom comes with experience. Simple as that. So avoiding the experience, there was a lot of gurus that came from the East who took the middle path and they attained some degree of enlightenment, maybe at the most in the sphere of Tippereth beauty. And they came to the West to teach, and they had the charisma and they had the love and the divine consciousness, but they hadn't done the work yet on their lower self. So they succumbed to the temptations of
building cities and poisoning people.
Material things.
Not to directly
sensation, pleasure,
yeah.
The sexual temptations, and the power, control temptations, and the desire for fame and to be worshipped.
Right.
And their egos became intoxicated, and they made mistakes, and they became fallen gurus. They just dropped off like flies because they weren't prepared for what this culture is.
Right.
They had gone into the celibacy of the Himalayas.
Right.
They hadn't faced those parts of themselves that would be attracted to these things.
Yeah.
They avoided it, and so they succumbed to those temptations.
When they began to, gosh.
It's a dangerous thing,
Yeah.
whether you're from the East or the West,
Yeah.
to succumb to these temptations. That's why I think the Tree of Life is so necessary, to really point out as a map what the journey really is. You don't just attain non-dual consciousness
Right.
on the level of Malkuth and you're done.
Yeah.
If it was that easy, it would be wonderful.
Yeah.
But that's not the way it really is. So I would say as long as a person is an individual consciousness, I'm repeating this, we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah.
A long ways to go. And as long as we're incarnated in a human body, we're still going to be human, and we're still going to have human desires. And we need to be honest about that. When we're no longer human, then we'll be above the human temptations. But I don't think any human being is. I don't think Jesus was. When Jesus drank the cup in the Garden of Gethsemane, what was in that cup was all of the suffering of humanity, all of the sin, all of the alienation from God, of all humans, past, present, and future. So when he accepted that, he was reduced to being just a human being. He lost his connection, conscious connection to God, though God remained one with him from God's side of the relationship. But from Jesus' side, he was reduced to a human being. And then he went through what he went through. It was the will of the Father, not his human will, because he asked, if it's possible, let this cup pass. So the cup was being reduced to a human being. So he experienced all of the suffering, betrayal, alienation from God, and pain, existential aloneness that any human being can experience as part of the price that he paid as his sacrificial love. And then the inner resurrection, of course, and he came out in a resurrection body. And to follow him, we have to allegorically go through that same process. That's the Christian spiritual journey.
Yeah.
So we have to allow our lower self to be crucified so that the inner resurrection of our true self can happen in our soul. And we become identified with Tiphereth in us. But we do it many times as we work up from Malkuth, through that tree, into Yesod, into Hod, into Netzach. And each one of those gives us a partial kind of sense of adepthood, because we experience the mystery of Tiphereth in the first degree and the different degrees, but it's only experienced in its fullness when our entire soul moves from the lower triad, the personality astral triad, into the middle triad, the spiritual moral triad, and every bit of us is part of Tiphereth beauty. And we don't have to incarnate anymore, unless we choose to. Our need to incarnate for our spiritual growth is over.
Right.
So if we choose to, it's in order to be of service. But then we have to take upon ourselves the limitations of the human condition, just as Jesus had.
Right. It makes me think of that, how
as a human being.
The double path that connects Tiferet with Hod. In the original book T, they're not bound to the chain; they're holding the chain. And I think of Ayin, the letter that corresponds with that path, being the eye, that in the title, "The Lord of the Gates of Matter." So you pass through the gates of matter by picking up that chain and being under the rulership of the devil in order to be in the personality triad. And as long as you hold on to that chain, that's where you are. And the way out of that chain is to close the eyes, to no longer be fixated on this world of matter, and to let go of the chain. And then you're in the higher realms. And we can do that here through meditation. And it helps to do yoga first, so you're not focused on your body pains.
Absolutely, yeah. To become aligned. Recently, because I've been invited to give a series of talks at a special centering prayer retreat, a 5-day retreat they're going to have in St. Louis at the Marist Center on the tree of life and inner transformation, with centering prayer. I'm going to be giving a series of 6 talks introducing people to a Christianized, version of the tree of life in the context of centering prayer. That's at the end of June. If 20 people sign up for the retreat, it's going to happen.
Well, Athanasius Kircher was a Jesuit priest, so he's the one who drew it. So you don't have to Christianize it.
Well, to present it in this
in its original
context for
Christian
people
context.
that are people who are already practitioners of centering prayer, who are Catholic or other Protestants.
Right.
It's going to be new to them. They've never heard of much of the tree of life.
Right.
So it's going to be very introductory.
Yeah.
But in preparing myself for it, I just recently reread Dion Fortune's book, The Mystical Kabbalah. And it made me think about your dad, because that was one of the books he told me to read when I was first curious about it as a college student.
Yeah, how cool.
And the book was way over my head. But I just noticed some really good insights in that book. She doesn't discuss the 32 paths, or the tarot arcanum. She just focuses on the 10 spheres.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
On the Clippeth.
Right.
And it's very interesting. One of the things she said in there that I thought was very interesting was about the relationship between Chesed, who she also calls Gedula, between Chesed and Geburah, severity, mercy and severity. How these two things have to balance each other out in the soul, in the individual soul, and in the world. And her idea of evil is that, good and evil actually, is that they're not things in themselves or principles, but they are conditions. This is, to me, a new way of looking at these
Yeah, this
two
is all
things.
basic Golden Dawn.
Because
it's a state of imbalance.
I think of good and evil as two cosmic principles.
As an aside on that, on the Luria tree, you know how there's the traditional Jewish, kind of the more Jewish tree of life, and then there's the Hermetic tree of life, the Kircher Jesuit one. There's the more Jewish-based one. The sphere Gebura is called the sphere of evil, and the sphere of Hesed is called the sphere of good. So it's specifically a Hermetic and Christian concept to say that God is light and in Him there is no darkness at all. That's New Testament, not Old Testament. And it's also contradicts other bits of Scripture. But in the Golden Dawn they say Lord of the light and the darkness. So it's the superior to both. Keter, in its king scale, is pure brilliance, not white brilliance. So it's beyond white and black. And
beyond the pairs of
masculine and
opposites.
feminine, exactly. And Gebura is taught as will and that Martian force, which of course in a kosher Kabbalah they'd say, wait, Mars, did you just randomly blurt out a Roman god? What are you talking about? You know, and you say, no, I mean Madim, the Hebrew word for the. But yeah, so there's those subtle differences where. What you're saying makes more sense from a Christian Kabbalah and Hermetic Kabbalah standpoint, but in a Jewish Kabbalah standpoint, the definition of evil might actually be more like your previous.
She deals with
assumption.
the misunderstanding of labeling Gebura as only evil is a complete misunderstanding.
Perhaps,
she's saying it's,
or just a different school.
Well, what she's saying is that what we would call evil is an imbalance of energies.
Yeah. And we would say that the imbalance can exist in mercy also. So unbalanced mercy is weakness and lack of will. Unbalanced severity is cruelty and oppression. But you bring them together and they temper each other and the whole tree of life is interconnected, then nothing is evil. Then everything is good because everything has its place. Like a body, a heart by itself isn't evil, an eye by itself isn't evil. I mean, like it's all part of the body and the body needs all of it.
Well, yeah, that's what I got from her book.
Yeah.
And she was saying, like, if mercy or chesed goes to extremes, it becomes evil.
Right.
It becomes idiot compassion.
Yeah, over permissiveness.
It becomes allowing destructiveness to occur. It becomes over permissiveness. And of course, if Gebura goes to an extreme, it becomes destructive, oppressive, and persecuting.
Yeah.
So the two need to pull against each other to keep each other
and that's
from going to the
path.
extremes.
The woman and the lion.
Right, the strength. And if you look at the situation in our country right now, the polarization that's existing politically, between
kind of
people
mirrors that
are liberals and conservatives, it mirrors it.
Yeah.
And instead of one labeling themselves as good and the other as evil,
they
need to recognize that each of them is necessary and each of them has both good and evil potentials within them, and to respect each other. Yeah. Without that, we'll never get peace or evolve forward. Ken Wilber, I mentioned him to you before, he wrote a very interesting article, and you can get it online, I think. It's about 80 pages long, but it's called Trump in a Post-Truth World, is the title of the article. And basically what he says in there is that the reason that we got the president we got was because the postmodernists, or the more progressive people, they failed to lead. They failed to really make a stand. They went too far into saying, well, everything is relative. All truths are equal. Everybody has their truth, and they're all equal.
Right.
Because they're hung up on taking the idea of equality to an extreme, and they don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah.
So they say, no matter what anyone's position is, it's just as valid as anyone else's is.
Right.
So they refuse to take any kind of a stand.
But everyone's a special snowflake.
Yeah, that's about what it is.
Yeah.
So that's what clicked to me when I was reading Fortune's book, was that's the chesed thing going to too much of an extreme. Everything is made the same. because they eschew any type of a hierarchical ranking because they don't want to offend
They perceive it as
anybody.
the old father knows best model.
Nothing
of
is better.
1950s.
Nothing is better than anything else. We're all equal.
Right.
And they love peace, which who isn't in
Except for
favor of
whichever red state they came from when they were 20. Yeah.
it? So they label the other people, of course, as evil, and they're good because they're so idealistic.
Right. They're the real Christians who heard the real message of Christ, and their parents are the bad Christians who listen to the preacher at the evangelical church back home.
So what Buber is saying in this article is that because the force of evolution couldn't find a place to work
In their
from,
own mind, I mean. Sorry.
it couldn't find a place to move forward from because the postmodern people didn't take any kind of a stand.
Yeah.
They were too wishy-washy.
Well, they wanted to play it safe and have someone who was in the system rather than the person who was actually being the voice for that movement. But anyway.
Well, what the force had to do was it had to regress
Yeah.
and go back to a warrior stage of consciousness and a traditional stage and a modern stage, and that is what Trump embodies.
Right.
And that's why we have it. So from there, the force can make another try.
Right.
In other words, regressing back to the previous level, but then trying to move forward.
Yeah,
And
organizing
then there will be
again.
another reorganization of what postmodernism was supposed to deliver.
Right.
Positive postmodernism, that is. Negative postmodernism wants to deconstruct everything.
Right.
It tears down
There's
the
a
individual.
meta-modernism now. Have you gotten into that one yet?
No.
I'll send you some links. But yeah.
But the negative postmodernism says that the individual doesn't have any spiritual value. It's all meaningless.
Right.
It's very pessimistic. The positive postmodernism is positive, but it needs more existentialism in it.
It's one. I was just talking to someone about how it seems that the argument on the left, like we argue with ourselves, half of us think all religion is bullshit, and the other half says all religions are equally valid. And then in the other states, it's, well, no, surely Christianity is
There's
the
only
correct
one.
Yeah.
When you regress back to the traditional,
Right.
or the warriors, or the tribal
The tribal,
stage,
yeah.
there's only one true thing, and everything else is a lie.
Yeah.
You know, whatever your choice is,
Yeah.
doesn't matter. But
yeah, we're fighting amongst ourselves over here in the left about how we should be the left. I mean, because it's new, because it's a new kind of way of life. That we're embracing all these extremes that have been put upon, and oddly grouping together, abortion rights with being gay publicly. I mean, things that don't seem intuitively to be related, but they all just end up in this one blue thing because they're all equally oppressed by the big red thing. I point out that people sometimes see my Golden Dawn tools and they're like, well, these seem like Wiccan tools. How come they have Hebrew written on them? And it's like, because the Catholic Church was oppressing witches and Jews, so they had to look out for each other. I don't know if that's true, but it's a fun story. But yeah, it's that same idea. They get lumped into the same category.
well, I was just really struck by the obvious fact that the problems that we're having now, they've always been the same, really, and it's right there on the tree of life.
Yeah.
Particularly in that pair of opposites, of mercy and severity.
Yeah.
It's really nothing new. It's in a different. It's like the props on the stage
Are different.
but the drama is no different at all.
And if it's souls that are moving up in their evolution and learning these lessons, like if that's the grounded reality that one is coming from, then all of this just basically looks like kindergarten. It looks like, there's a generation coming in, they were dogs in their previous life, and then there's a generation on their way out, this is their last life, and, that's the graduating class, those are the freshmen, but I mean, for me,
between those, there's a lot.
There's a lot, yeah. For me, I mean, I grew up with that paradigm, thanks to you apparently, but I doubt it. I mean, I'm not fully grounded in it. I want to think that way because it seems like, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous scientist, says be skeptical of philosophies that make you feel better, that people tend to want to believe the things that will make them
The
feel better.
feel-good spirituality.
Yeah.
That was one of the things Wilbur criticizes. He says, or has said, that there's two kinds of spirituality. There's a transformative spirituality, which involves work and facing the reality of your soul,
Right.
my term, and then there's the feel-good spirituality, which pampers the ego.
Right.
And his criticism of a lot of the postmodern New Age is that it's too much feel-good
Right.
and not enough transformation. But if you want to evolve, you have to have a transformation practice, not just a feel-good practice
On
that
that
keeps you
subject,
stuck
though,
there.
on that subject, I think that if you put certain spiritual paradigms and practices, maybe even certain New Age ones or certain other ones, on one hand, and then on the other hand, you have, the path of the atheist, who isn't just someone who is wanting to talk badly about the religion they were brought up in, but someone who really feels that they are nothing more or less than the cosmic dust swirling in a particular way at the present time. And that I feel that is a hardcore spiritual path.
That's a modern stage.
That's it, but it's a hardcore spiritual
scientific
path. To look,
materialism, yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can put a label on it and say it's different from spirituality, but the point that I'm making is the opposite of that, which is that if somebody says, I have an angel, I used to have an imaginary friend, now I have an angel, and the angel tells me everything's going to be okay and I feel okay. On one hand. And then on the other hand, you have someone staring into the abyss at the destruction of their own individual ego. Mm-hmm. And maybe they don't see what's on the other side of that abyss. Maybe they don't see that maybe there's a universal consciousness on the other side. But the person who is playing around in the astral looking for Jesus and trying to find out which person dressed as Jesus is the real Jesus, the atheist is miles ahead.
I agree. If they're being honest,
Yeah.
they're passing through the dark night,
Yeah.
the existential crisis, the existential
And they'll
anguish.
get there first. I mean,
And
you maybe.
That's part of the transformative journey.
Yeah.
Like John of the Cross has this classic thing called the dark night of the soul.
Right.
Night of sense and night of spirit. And that's part of the dues we have to pay. And that's the thing that someone that wants a feel-good spirituality is scared shitless to face up to.
Yeah.
But that's part of the key to opening the door.
Yeah, and it's one of the...
Dying to
from
yourself.
a tantric perspective or from a tree of life perspective, the death path is there. That's one of the things you got to confront about the universe / yourself. And I mean, not slash yourself, but I mean the grammatical punctuation.
I need to go to the restroom.
Yeah, sure.
Could you pause for a moment? Something that I found, like I've been on a tour since 17th of February, and I've met with some communities, in different cities, like in Washington State and in Colorado and Texas and so forth. And what I was sad to discover in some of these communities is there are a number of people who, they're more of, the postmodern or liberal frame of reference. They have become so disturbed and anxious and worried about the polarization in the country, and they feel so strongly anti, the results of the election and so forth, that they're losing their spiritual center. They're losing their peace. They're being infected by the negativity of the polarization, and it's spiritually, it's like handicapping them quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so I've said to them that it's important that we keep our inner peace intact.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a story I'll share with you. It's a good lesson that this actually came from the teacher from India, Swami Amarjyoti. It's a story from his life that he shared some years ago, and the principle of it, I think, is kind of cute, kind of interesting. At a certain point, when he was 19, he was called, to the spiritual path. And he dropped out of college. He was from a pretty well-to-do family in Bombay, which now I think what do they call Bombay? Dubai? No, not Dubai. It has another name now, anyway. And so he renounced the world. And he was studying in the ashram of a particular guru. And he didn't own one single material possession. I mean, he had his clothes, except he had an alarm clock. And he used the alarm clock to wake up at 4 every morning so he could start doing his meditation practices. That was the only thing he owned. And one day, he came back, and his alarm clock was gone. Someone had stolen it. And he was really upset, because he's thinking, well, how am I going to get up to do my meditation and my sadhana and my prayer and so forth, And he went to his teacher, his guru, and told him, Master, somebody stole my alarm clock. And the teacher said to him, well, this person stole your alarm clock, but have you also let him steal your peace?
Yeah.
And basically, that's what I see happening to a lot of good, sincere, peace-loving people, is that they're allowing this polarization to steal their peace.
Yeah.
And the alarm clock represents the amount of time that they spend listening to the news, hearing about all this, and having negative reactions to it.
So, and I think that it's appropriate. I mean, there's a few people
our time is being stolen and our peace.
There's a few people that have been activated, like when that happened, they came awake, and I felt like I was one of them. Lindsay was one of them. Janie's grandma was one of them. Like people who just are like, okay, it's time for me to step up, and clearly the world needs helpers, and I'm pretty darn sure to whatever degree I can, I'm one of them. And so here I am, I'm awake. And so it kind of had the opposite effect. And I think that when people become angry, and they think that they're helping, they think that they're supposed to be angry. I had a yoga teacher. I went the morning after the inauguration, and the guy who was teaching the yoga class was like judging me for smiling. He was like, surely you couldn't be smiling on a day like this during the yoga class, and he's the teacher. So there's an example of someone kind of maybe misunderstanding the message a little bit.
He got his clock stolen.
Yeah, exactly.
And his
peace, right. But I had just had a meeting the night before that was profoundly, like, we did chakra working, we did Tibetan work, we did Golden Dawn work, and it was 3 awakened people, and it was this profound thing, and I woke up the next morning and went to yoga class because I was inspired, and so I just felt like I was glowing and humming and smiling. So he assumed I was a Trump supporter who was gloating for the fact that my guy won, and so he was like, you should talk to me after class, like it was weird, but yeah, it's just the different reaction. I think that anger's part of it. Maybe it's part of the process of mourning, anger, sadness and denial and all that, but becoming activated, realizing it's time to focus. It's time to focus on spirituality.
Well, it can be cathartic, for sure.
And it can be a fuel. It can be a motivating fuel, as opposed to just a fuel that burns up and burns you out.
Yeah, well, the problem is only there if the person loses their spiritual poise, their peace, and they allow themselves to be taken over by they give into the negativity, and they allow that to become their center.
Or in a sense,
it dissipates their presence of mind, their ability to be alive in the present moment, because they're so focused on expressing their anger. And a lot of times it's anger that's inside of us that we've been suppressing, and so this is an outlet for it.
Yeah, everybody's raging at that horrible father figure in their lives.
Our Gebura just kind of runs amok, and runs out of balance with the severity. I mean, with the mercy side. Well, when one of the talks I gave, a person in the audience stood up and said, "How can you recommend this?" And what I did was I gave him a formula, that was given to me by that teacher, how you can keep your inner peace intact under all circumstances. And the formula goes like this. There's 4 different ways people can be when you confront them. And depending on which of these 4 ways they are, there's an appropriate way to outwardly respond to them that will allow you to keep your peace intact. Under all conditions, inwardly you're to love all of these people. You're to feel love towards all these people. But outwardly, you don't express or show that love to all 4 types. The first type of person is, and the same person could be all 4 of these at different times.
Right.
But the first type of person is the person that's happy. You be happy with them that they're happy. The second type of person is the person that's unhappy, that's suffering. You have compassion outwardly for that person and help them if you can. Be considerate, kind, come to their assistance, show mercy and compassion outwardly. The third type of person is the person who is being virtuous, who is doing the right thing. This type of person, you affirm them. You give them honor. You give them happiness. You give them positive reinforcement because they're upholding righteousness and virtue. The fourth type of person, of course, is the problematic one. That's the person that's being unvirtuous, who's doing wrong, who's doing evil, who's creating suffering, who's being dishonest, etc. If you want to keep your peace intact, you're to inwardly love them, outwardly to take a neutral, detached attitude toward them and move away from them.
Disregard in the Yoga Sutras. Yeah.
Don't answer them in the same coin that they are.
Yeah.
Don't be negative to a negative person because you'll get sucked into the vortex of the negativity.
Yeah.
And so when I said that, this person who's really fired up, he got up and he said, wait a minute, how can you advocate that when all this terrible stuff is happening in our society? We can't just sit by and allow this to happen. And so I said to him, well, you always have a choice. What I've given you is a practical formula to use if you want to keep your peace intact. However, you may choose, and it may be the right thing for you to do, not to just be neutral towards that person. You might want to follow the example of Jesus when he went into the temple and whipped the money changers. He used violence and anger. But inwardly, I believe he was at peace, and he had love and compassion for those people, but outwardly, he was expressing total negativity and condemnation. If you can keep your peace intact and do that, then it's safe for you to do this.
Yeah.
But if you allow yourself to get caught up in it and taken over by it, then you're losing spiritually.
Right.
And your action will be less effective than it is if you have compassion in your heart inwardly when you're doing it, whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
But you always have a free choice. It's just a question of what is your priority, what do you want. If you don't have at least 80% peace of mind inwardly, you cannot meditate. You cannot commune with your higher self. So the price of losing that peace is too great if you're on the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
It ain't worth it.
Yeah.
But if you're at a place where inwardly you don't lose your peace and your spiritual poise, that might be what you are supposed to do. Maybe your higher self is directing you to do that.
That makes me think of the Lakota tribes and the...
Oh, that's another good example of it.
That people who, did it appropriately were participating in prayerful activity and meditation activity in maintaining their inner peace, even though they were standing up to, an army. They were standing up to these men in riot gear and stuff. So there's an example of a way where you can, an answer to that guy's question, and an example you could cite of these people didn't lose their peace of mind. Why? Because, they were doing what needed to be done. They, in the end, I don't know if I think it's probably going to go ahead and they're going to go ahead and build it. But
But they maintain their spiritual grounding.
And they really made an impact, and people heard them, and it's going to be in the history books, and hopefully it will be part of a step toward a better world where we don't have all these oil pipes everywhere.
So that's a beautiful example of a higher consciousness being brought to bear into a very negative situation.
Yeah.
That's the example to follow, and that's the type of leadership that is needed from the postmodern consciousness. It can't just allow for the destruction to take place.
Yeah.
And say, well, everything is all equal and it's all the same, and therefore it's wrong to take a stand. There comes a point where you have to take a stand. That's how this world is.
Yeah.
It's not our choice. It's not the way we would choose it, but that's what the conditions are. There's a lot of spiritual things going on in that confrontation from the inner planes. Obviously.
Yeah, a lot. Well, should we wrap this up for now?
Sure.
We're just over the 2. So thank you so much. This is thank you for listening to this. This has been Kess Frey, and this is Easter Sunday, April 16th, 2017. I'm Edward Reed.
Yes.
And we're at the coffee table in Eagle Rock, and I have my microphone out, and people are looking at us funny. And thank you all for tuning in. So thank you very much.
All right, pleasure.
Thank you, Kess Frey, for being our guest on the Esoterinerd podcast tonight. Thank you to Susumu Ueda and his father and the other monks at Jofuku-in Temple for the music you're listening to right now. Thank you to Camille and Kennerly for the harp intro and outro to the interview itself. Thank you to Israeli Sesame Street and to John Goldman for the music used in the Aleph Bet Vet Gimel Daled Hey segment. And most importantly, thank you to you, the Esoterinerd, listening to this podcast. I will close with the words of Padmasambhava, as recorded by Yeshe Tsogyal. I am a yogi, beyond word, thought, and description, who journeys on the plane of the view free from extremes. When I journey on the plane of this view, I journey while regarding appearance and existence as Dharmakaya. I am a yogi of luminous appearance and emptiness, who journeys on the plane of the meditation of empty bliss. When I journey on the plane of this meditation, I journey beyond meditation and post-meditation. I am a yogi of self-liberated perception, who journeys on the plane of spontaneous conduct. When I journey on the plane of this conduct, I journey in equal taste, without accepting or rejecting. I am a yogi of self-existing non-fabrication, who journeys on the plane of spontaneously accomplished fruition. When I journey on the plane of this fruition, I journey free from hope and fear. I am a yogi, beyond word, thought, and description, who journeys over the pass of the view free from extremes. When I journey over the pass of this view, I journey beyond meditation throughout day and night. I am a yogi of luminous appearance and emptiness, who journeys over the pass of meditation of empty bliss. When I journey over the pass of this meditation, I journey free from dullness and agitation. I am a yogi of self-liberated perception, who journeys over the pass of spontaneous conduct. When I journey over the pass of this conduct, I journey while sowing the seeds of omniscience. I am a yogi of self-existing non-fabrication, who journeys over the pass of spontaneously accomplished fruition. When I journey over the pass of this fruition, I am the Buddha of perfected realization. I am a yogi beyond word, thought, and description, who journeys down the slope of the view free from extremes. When I journey down the slope of this view, I dwell in the state of non-arising dharmata. I am a yogi of luminous appearance and emptiness, who journeys down the slope of the meditation of empty bliss. When I journey down the slope of this meditation, I dwell in the state of undistracted non-meditation. I am a yogi of self-liberated perception, who journeys down the slope of spontaneous conduct. When I journey down the slope of this conduct, I act according to the words of the Sugatas. I am a yogi of self-existing non-fabrication, who journeys down the slope of spontaneously accomplished fruition. When I journey down the slope of this fruition, I am the Buddha whose stream of being is purified. I am a yogi beyond word, thought, and description, who journeys to the place of the view free from extremes. When I journey to the place of this view, samsara and nirvana are of the same nature. I am a yogi of luminous appearance and emptiness, who journeys to the place of the meditation of emptiness bliss. When I take the journey to the place of this meditation, the nature of thought is wisdom. I am a yogi of self-liberated perception, who journeys to the place of spontaneous conduct. When I journey to the place of this conduct, appearance and existence have the nature of a mandala. I am a yogi of self-existing non-fabrication, who journeys to the place of spontaneously accomplished fruition. When I journey to the place of this fruition, everything is the nature of Buddhahood. Once you realize the intent of this song, samsara is nothing to be rejected, and nirvana is nothing to be accomplished. Special thanks to Dharma Sound. That was a track of them playing in the background during the recital. You can find them at dharmasoundyoga.com. To the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, to the spirits of light among us and to the spirits below, we send out our reverent love and compassion. May all beings be happy. May all beings be serene. May all beings